Good morning and welcome to this morning's podcast at InvestorIdeas.com. Today I'm talking to Roger Cressey, partner at Mountain Wave Ventures. Roger is a cybersecurity and counterterrorism expert with years of experience and insight. He gives us a historical and future view of cybersecurity, how AI is playing a current and future role, and what to look for as an investor in the space. Roger's government service included senior cybersecurity and counterterrorism positions in the Clinton and Bush administrations. Good morning, Roger. Thanks for joining us today. I've known you for years, and I've always had a pleasure speaking to you, and you've always provided insight and expertise on whatever's happening in the cybersecurity and counterterrorism space. But for our listeners that don't know you and haven't heard you in the past, can you just give us an intro on who you are, your past, your experience, and how you got into this space?
Oh, absolutely, Don. And again, it's great to reconnect with you and look forward to the conversation. So I served in the State Department, served in the Pentagon, and then served at the White House in the 1990s through 9/11. I was the Deputy for Counterterrorism on the National Security Council staff on 9/11. So was there in the Situation Room when everything was going down. And then moved on to cybersecurity, where I've spent a lot of time over the past 20-plus years doing cyber risk management, working for clients that are trying to figure out what the government's up to, which is a never-ending journey, and also just trying to understand how we can create greater resilience in our cybersecurity approaches and greater resilience at large regarding critical infrastructure. So that's where I spend most of my time, and it's never dull, that's for sure.
I would think COVID-19 shutdowns were one of the biggest impacts that we've seen in the space when you look at some of the most critical services we depend on, from health to education, and then government services were all of a sudden online, and we had to access everything so differently. Can you talk about that and the impact that had in terms of threats and then solutions, obviously?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to a colleague the other day about how we're still recovering from the pandemic, how things have fundamentally shifted in certain ways, certainly from a workforce perspective, working from home, how technology has enabled a lot of new things, whether it's, Zoom meetings and collaborative online tools, just how we deal with, the general acceptance now of when we see somebody wearing a mask, we don't think two things about it, right? We just assume that's their choice. They might be dealing with a variety of medical issues, or maybe they're not. They're doing it out of abundance of caution because of other people in their life. We've come to accept it. It is socially acceptable now to wear masks in our world in a way that, if you traveled to Asia not that long ago, they wore masks all the time. It was cultural as well as societal. And I think that certainly has been a remarkable evolution. What I think the greatest lesson on the pandemic was that it was the resilience of a different type. We bent as a society, but we didn't break. And we also looked at how the government, when it really wants to do something and is focused, can get something done. At least in the United States, and certainly in Canada as well. And this is a political statement about as President Biden would say, his predecessor. It's more of the government agencies, when there is that prioritized focus, we have to do this because it's an emergency, things will get done. It cut through what is a classic challenge in Washington, which is there are so many priorities. Well, if everything's an equal priority, therefore nothing is a priority. And what the pandemic demonstrated is that the government, working with industry, and that was the other part of this, industry's indispensable role in addressing COVID, but making it a true priority is where you can see success. So I think that example is the great positive. The second, of course, is I think we demonstrated how resilient we are as a society. There were certainly some ups and downs, the quintessential highs and lows. But that resiliency that we were able to hold on to endure, to persevere with, unimaginable loss of life, I think is also another point we should just keep in mind. And it's one that I think government today also reflects back on.
And going back to your background, I mean, you started in counterterrorism as well. And for years, all we ever were focused on, again, is like, you know, if you see something, say something. The whole threat of terrorism was very much a part of our everyday life when we traveled, when we went to a different city, when we were on an airplane. And we don't really hear that much about it anymore.
Well, I think the way I would say it is the threat of terrorism is still real. The threat of terrorism in North America is at a different level now. A lot of that has to do with the tremendous work we've done from a law enforcement perspective. There has also been a recognition that since what I would call the destruction of Al-Qaeda proper, the organizations that have replaced it, that have superseded it, have been very aspirational in wanting to attack Western interests outside of the Middle East, but operationally, their ability has been quite limited. And again, that's not an accident, right? There's been a ton of pressure and a ton of focus that continues to be there. So there is that part of it. And then there are also organizations that wish us ill, such as Hezbollah and a few others like that, that should they choose to go operational against us, you know, when I talk to my friends still in the counterterrorism business, they say they still have the capabilities. It's just a choice on their part. And that choice is a function of a variety of factors. Some of those are related to what we would do, also related to what is in their best interest. So I think that's one thing to think about on terrorism. And I think when the post 9/11 history is written with a few more decades of hindsight, we're going to look back and say we swung from one end of the pendulum to the other in terms of dealing with terrorism as a society. And we treated it as a existential threat, a threat to our way of life, when in fact it was never that. Certainly there were tremendous concerns about Al-Qaeda and its affiliates acquiring WMD, weapons of mass destruction, and those concerns still are active today. But what we've learned in hindsight is that their capabilities in this space is extremely limited. And we were dealing not with an existential threat, but we were dealing with a very specific threat. And the term that always made me crazy was when the Bush administration called it the global war on terrorism. Well, you can't have a war on terrorism. Terrorism is a tool. It's kind of like saying, you know, we're having a global war against ballistic missiles, right? Missiles are a tool. It's a weapon. But terrorism is not a political ideology. It's the tool through which ideology is executed. And so we were misaligned that way, and it took us years to kind of figure that out. And I think we're in a much better space now in dealing with terrorism, not as an existential threat, but as a limited, specific threat that we have a variety of tools to address. So I think on the terrorism side, that's where we are in 2024. On cybersecurity, there is absolutely no doubt that the importance of cybersecurity has grown exponentially in the past few years. And that stems from a very basic point. We all forget, when the Internet was created, nobody assumed our nation's national security, Canada's national security, our economic security was ultimately going to be dependent upon a safe, reliable, and secure Internet. But that's what happened over time for a whole host of understandable reasons. And the Internet was designed with some of the protocols that became widely adopted. It was designed not with security in mind. So, you know, we often look at the automobile industry and compare it to cybersecurity in the following way. You know, the automobile industry fought mandatory seat belts. They fought mandatory airbags. They fought a lot of the safety and security design and engineering things we all take for granted today. Those were fought for years. But it became a secure by design requirement in the automobile industry, in our physical world. What hasn't happened yet in cybersecurity is that same fundamental agreement that safety and security, secure by design software, hardware, firmware, should trump any first-to-market business objectives. And at a time when we're dealing with a whole range of threats, which we can talk about, our vulnerability is baked in to the infrastructure that the internet rides on, and that is our central dilemma. And the other metaphor people talk about is, well, we need to fix it. We need to fix it right away. But this plane has been at 40,000 feet for years now, and you just can't rip the engine off in mid-flight and fix it and expect to keep going. So we have that fundamental challenge of how to replace legacy infrastructure, make it more secure with new capabilities, and also get people to be, to go back to another metaphor, look both ways when you're crossing the internet street. Right? You have an obligation yourself to be safe and aware. So that's where we're at on cybersecurity.
We had that constant thing in the back of our head about terrorism. When you look at AT&T's outages recently, everybody's first gut reaction is fear. So what would you say are our biggest threats in terms of cybersecurity and how to put us somewhat at ease maybe, because I think that is just a reaction now that we all have.
Yeah. Well, I'll go from small to big because I think, we have to, again, much like how we dealt with terrorism as an existential threat, mistakenly, we need to understand how to deal with cybersecurity. So at the lowest level, you have individual actors usually engaged in criminal activity, and you have organizations, true crime organizations, that are engaging in whether it's ransomware attacks or other types of attacks where data is being stolen and then sold on the open market. That type of criminal activity is not going to go away. It is going to be steady state for a long time, and we are continuing to manage and understand how to address ransomware in these type of events that the cyber criminal organizations do. You move up the stack a little bit, and then you get other organizations. These are nation-state organizations, and you've got the four big ones, of course, are North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China, in that ascending order of seriousness. The North Koreans, they're a criminal enterprise when it comes to cybersecurity. While they'll engage in data theft, what they're really looking to do is to raise money through cyber crimes in order to generate revenue that they can't generate in the way a typical economy would. And they've proven to be quite successful at that. So whether it's Bitcoin, cryptocurrency ripoffs, exploitations that way, the North Koreans are quite talented at cybercrime. The Iranians are what I call a lower level nation state threat. They have probed and looked at our nation's critical infrastructure for years now. Certainly they're doing the same in Canada, but at a lower level. Their skill sets are not as sophisticated, but that doesn't make them less effective. And the reason why that is, it ties back to our earlier point about the internet is not designed with safety and security in mind. So even Iranian nation-state actors can do some significant harm. Most notably, about a dozen years ago, they launched a distributed denial of service attack against financial service institutions in North America, and that was a bit of a wake-up call about what the Iranians were capable of doing. Certainly, considering the level of hostilities that are going on in the Middle East right now, and this inevitable, I believe, U.S.-Iranian confrontation that is probably going to happen in the next year or two. Cyber will be a part of that as well. You go up to the Russians, and the Russians don't play the long game like the Chinese do, but the Russians are very skilled and talented at exploiting existing vulnerabilities, conducting attacks, dropping malware, and using their intelligence arms to really create cyber-level penetrations that can have both near and longer-term consequences. And then, obviously, from my mind, the biggest actor are the Chinese. And the Chinese are so good because of their capabilities, their training, their skill, the volume of resources they can bring to this this area. Whereas the Russians may not have the same technical sophistication as the Chinese, they have a lot of very well-trained people. The Chinese have the technical sophistication as well as trained people. And we've been looking at, our nation's government has been looking at the Chinese with increased concern. Part of it related to potential hostilities over Taiwan, but also just the Chinese success in penetrating our critical infrastructure. It wasn't too long ago where our FBI director and his four counterparts, the 5 countries that are collectively called the Five Eyes because of our agreements to share intelligence amongst each other, they all traveled to Silicon Valley. And in the first time ever, unprecedented, they had a meeting with the leaders of the tech industry in Silicon Valley and said, you may not think the Chinese are a threat to your intellectual property, are not conducting reconnaissance right now, but they are. And we're here to tell you it's real and you need to pay attention to it. So that was we're being a little more open in public about our concerns over the Chinese with industry. And I think that's something we have to pay attention to. And the last point I'll say about the Chinese, the Biden administration has been very clear lately that in the event of a conflict over Taiwan, the Chinese will conduct cyber engagements against us as a way to instill panic, to sow discourse, and to basically call into question the ability of our government at the federal, state, and local level to provide basic services. So they've been doing certain types of attacks where they're embedding themselves in critical infrastructure with the express purpose that if things do go hot over Taiwan, the Chinese would be in a place to take actions here. Our government's fully aware of it. We're working hard to address it. But this, I would say, is probably the greatest concern we have right now.
Yeah, because you read a lot of analysts and a lot of people think this is, with the election coming up this year, we're probably going to be focused on cybersecurity more than ever. I would think so anyway. We've got, global elections going on, not just the U.S. one. It's a year
right.
that I think cybersecurity is going to get tested in a big way.
And I would separate there is the question of election integrity versus this other issue we'll talk about a little bit later. I'm less worried about the Chinese and the Russians hacking into systems and causing chaos that way. I believe a lot of at the state and local level there is tremendous resilience because there is no national integrated election technology, and that's a good thing. This is where federalism actually plays quite well. So are there going to be cases where we have this as a concern? Absolutely. Could it happen in certain states that may in fact decide the election? That's where I would be focusing most of my attention.
One of the other things that is a great innovation, but I think a pretty serious concern as well, is the adoption of AI technology, and it's being integrated into cybersecurity and pretty well everything out there right now. And you look at how it can advance things, but I recently watched that documentary, The AI Dilemma, and there's not, I feel at this point, I know there's some associations that have been created to address, creating watchdogs for AI technology, but I don't know if there is enough of a watchdog out there. And that documentary showed it can trick you and also be tricked. So when you look at the content that's being generated out there, and it's hard for the average person to decipher what's real and what's not. I mean, what are your thoughts on AI innovation and as a security risk?
Well, there is no watchdog. That dog is running free right now, unfortunately. And I don't expect there is going to be a watchdog anytime soon. So we have to accept that. So I agree with you. Artificial intelligence is both fascinating, revolutionary, and frightening all at the same time. And when we talked about cybersecurity in the election, where I believe the greatest threat lies is in this area of misinformation, disinformation, and maligned information, where, 10 years ago, people would go on Facebook or some of the other social media platforms and be indoctrinated with false statements, with misinformation that definitely impacted their views and certainly sowed a different level of chaos. The concern of now today is with these AI tools, it takes that ability to do mis, dis, and malinformation to 10 levels better. And the reason why is that the tools that are being developed, these large language models, which are the basis upon which the algorithms that run artificial intelligence are built on, they are using data that, if you do not know the origin of that data, what's called data provenance, you're running a tremendous risk that the artificial intelligence tools could be both inaccurate and also could be used for ill will. So data integrity, data provenance is going to become an incredibly important term that will be used. I know Washington, both the administration as well as Congress are taking a look at that. The other element of artificial intelligence is what I call the transparency component of it. Related again to how your model's developed, where's the information coming from, and how do the algorithms that are sitting on top of these models run in order so that we can better understand where the answers come from. So what I tell my kids is you can play around with AI tools, you can play around with AI information, but you need to cross-check the answers on AI when it comes to what I call civic-related questions with recognized news sources that are trustworthy. And those stem on both the Republican and Democratic sides, but editorially controlled, based in fact, and then you can get a better idea if the AI tools are giving you answers that you want. I'm a big fan of Scott Galloway, who does a podcast. He's a business marketing leader, and I agree with his line when he talks about AI, when he says AI is not going to take your job, but someone who knows and uses AI can take your job. So understanding AI in that respect, I think, is very is where we're at. And I'm not worried about the Skynet Terminator 2 machines are about to take over the world anytime soon. But I do want to ensure that on all security-related decisions, humans remain in the loop. And the Pentagon has been very clear about that. I believe most Western defense institutions will be in that place as well. But we have a long way to go. We are so early in this process. We're still figuring it out. We're still coming up with the guardrails that we need to put in place. And the last thing I'll say on it, you mentioned the social dilemma. We were very passive as a society when social media really came to the forefront. And no one asked the hard questions. What's the downside? How can these tools be used for ill will, for negativity? What is the underbelly of these social media tools? Those questions weren't asked. And we then ended up in a position where it was too late to do anything about it. It gives me hope. Those questions are being asked right now regarding artificial intelligence. And so we need to be very, very proactive. And we also need to ensure we do not let the developers of artificial intelligence write the rules. They need to be at the table, but they do not write the rules, or we're going to make the same mistakes with AI that we did with social media. That, I think, is one of the greatest reminders we need close to us.
I agree. I think we had no idea what was coming at us. My concern is, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, is when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, it's a fine line of, creating that police state mentality of who defines what is correct information, who defines what isn't. I mean, we still have to create an environment of freedom of thought, of expression, of exchange of ideas, and we've somewhat created, well, not somewhat, I think it's very clear, we've created a very divided society through social media. That was one of the things that the documentary showed, and they're saying that will continue with AI, is that people have created this atmosphere where they're afraid to express their opinion. And, you know, that's the heart of innovation. That's the drive of innovation, is an exchange of ideas where you could tell me something I didn't know. You could tell me something that's new information, and I can share that back with you. And we meet somewhere in the middle and go, well, that's an interesting way to approach it. And I guess that's my biggest concern with all of this. And then when you hear that this information can be, you know, labeled as a cybersecurity act of terrorism, who defines that?
Well, this question over how to use this technology within our constitutional framework, within the rule of law, is one that's going to be a challenging one for the foreseeable future. And I think the lack of what we used to call the sensible center in American politics really creates opportunities for misuse of AI. Because what AI will do is it's the jet fuel that can really sow complications in our society in a very negative way if we're not careful. It comes down to people just they have to be more willing to not just accept what is told them at face value through these type of tools, and to be curious, to have that, you know, that civic mindedness to think and look at alternate perspectives. You know, the 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we disagreed in Washington, we pretty much did it in a mostly civil way. The disagreement now, it's become tribal politics in a way that if you're not with me, therefore you must be against me. And I'm not interested in engaging in a discourse. I'm engaging in right or wrong from my perspective. These tools will just amplify that type of tribal politics in a way that really creates this tremendous concern that I think we're all feeling right now.
Problems create opportunity, innovation. So what would you say to look for if somebody wanted to invest in the cybersecurity space? What do you see the landscape like, and where do you see the opportunities?
Well, the landscape's not going to get any smaller, right? To use the term, the attack surface is just going to keep growing. I think a lot of the recognized leaders are not going anywhere. For example, the CrowdStrikes of the world certainly will continue to be a company that's relied upon because of their advanced threat hunt capabilities. Every cybersecurity company is going to, or has already incorporated an AI capability. And, you know, buyer beware. You got to look under the hood and make sure what they're advertising is something that actually makes a difference. And as long as we're dependent on poorly designed and poorly constructed products from Microsoft, there is going to be tremendous opportunity for the cybersecurity industry to work with government as well as the private sector. I joked to my friends in Redmond that you could put the cybersecurity industry out of business if you just designed more secure products. They don't find humor in that, unfortunately.
One of the best jokes I heard during the pandemic is how can Bill Gates advise on human and health viruses when Microsoft has always had the most viruses in any technology? And it's true, right? We're constantly on alert with that technology. So I agree. Like they could solve a lot of our problems if we had more secure. Why do you think that is?
Oh, Don, we need an hour to talk about that. or longer, because I will. You can really get me monologuing. I'll just say very quickly, their business model and their business approach and the culture of that business prevents it from doing the right thing from a security perspective. They are the poster child for first to market. You just look at what they're doing with OpenAI, and secure to market is not a business driver for them. And as a result of that, they continue to put out products that are vulnerable by virtue of the code within which they're written and how they're designed. So, you know, there's a lot, and I'll tell you, the frustrations in Washington over Microsoft I'm witnessing now are stronger than I've ever seen before. So you hope something good will come out of that. Where I think, you know, industry opportunities is certainly the tools that give the government and private industry an advantage over the attacker. There's no such thing as foolproof security. You know, the essence of the zero trust concept that we hear so much about today is an assumption that you will be breached. So being able to identify when an attacker is in your network at the quickest possible time to minimize their impact is still going to be a huge priority. Resiliency and the tools that can support resilient infrastructure are still going to be something that is required. You know, you look at the chip industry right now, and boy, I wish I got in on NVIDIA a couple of years ago, but the requirements for building the AI infrastructure are going to be driven by data centers, are going to be driven by power. The electrical requirements to power an AI society are going to be enormous. And then the software that is involved in supporting that, as well as hardware such as the chips, are going to be areas for the foreseeable future that'll be strong to invest in. The technological evolution won't stop, and it's just a question of who can identify what comes next faster than everybody else.
So if you were just going to look down the road 10 years from now, I mean, I know nobody can because AI is regenerative at this point and advancing faster than anybody had ever thought. What do you think the future is going to look like 10 years from now in terms of us being online with security, with issues, with technology?
Well, you remember about 10 years ago, people were completely enamored with the idea of self-driving cars and completely enamored with the concept of, yep, we're going to have self-driving cars within the next 10 years. And what has happened? There have been a lot of false starts. There's been a lot of delays. And certainly technology has been deployed in cars to help with safety. But it's like that old song that talked about we were promised jetpacks as a kid. So I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. I do think what will happen in the AI world is greater development, greater deployment that will become, in many ways, it's going to become something that is in the fabric of our daily technological life, and we don't identify it as artificial intelligence per se. We just identify it as a tool we've come dependent upon in order to do what we do. So much like a smartphone is technology we are dependent upon every day in different ways. I think where the artificial intelligence revolution will go, we'll be in a similar place. And there's going to be tremendous upsides. Where my quick answer on that is, from a STEM perspective, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, I am excited and thrilled for what AI will lead to. From a public policy, from a political science perspective, I am absolutely frightened for the reasons we talked about. So where it can do great work, and then of course in the world of AGI, I think is what people are most concerned about, right? The sentient artificial intelligence destination. We're still a ways away from that, though. I don't think we're even going to be hitting that in 10 years. But we're going to have pieces of it.
Also, Investor Ideas has a lineup of other podcasts and themes, including the AII, the Crypto Corner, our cannabis podcast called Cannabis News and Stocks on the Move, rated one of the top investor podcasts in the sector, Play by Play, a podcast looking at sports and esports news, and Exploring Mining. To listen to any of our podcasts, visit our podcast page on Investor Ideas at investorideas.com/audio. And a reminder, you can hear our podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Google Play Music, and most audio platforms available to you. If you like any of our podcasts, we would appreciate you recommending them or reviewing them on your audio platform. Investor Ideas does remind all of investors to read our disclaimers and disclosures on our site. You can find them at investorideas.com/about-disclaimer.asp. It is important to read these. And this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investment involves risk and a possible loss of investment. Thank you again and have a great day.